The Land Before Time started out with one film released in 1988, and then over the course of the next 3 decades, we got 13 direct-to-video sequels. How did we get here? Why did we get here? That's what I've set out to answer with today's video. The Land Before Time started out with 3 main names: Don Bluth, Steven Spielberg, and George Lucas. Don Bluth and Steven Spielberg were coming off the massive success of An American Tail, which made $85 million on just a $9 million budget. When they were working on their next film, they wanted to make a film like Bambi or The Rite of Spring from Disney's Fantasia, with minimal dialogue and a more realistic take on the animals. Eventually, Spielberg's friend George Lucas got involved in the project, and The Land Before Time released in 1988. The film was another huge hit. Right out of the gate, the movie broke the record for the highest domestic box office opening weekend for an animated movie, eventually ending up grossing $85 million on a $12 million budget. Then there wasn't another film in the series until The Land Before Time 2, The Great Valley Adventure, which came out in 1994. Why did they make a straight-to-video sequel? And why wait so long after the first film? Well, there are a few easy answers. In the early 1990s, there was a huge dinosaur craze, largely spurred on by another Steven Spielberg film, Jurassic Park. So they wanted to cash in on the dinosaur craze with sequels to their own dinosaur franchise. But why straight to video instead of releasing in theaters? To answer that, we have to look at what Disney was doing at the time. In 1992, Disney released Aladdin, and just 2 years later, they released The Return of Jafar, which was the first American animated direct-to-video film. The Return of Jafar had a significantly lower budget than Aladdin. The animation looked worse, the story was meh, and they didn't bring back Robin Williams as the genie. The film didn't get good reviews, and it's not remembered fondly, but the film made a lot of money. In its first 2 days on shelves, it sold more than 1.5 million copies. Within a week, that number was 4.6 million. In the US alone, it eventually cleared 10 million copies, making it one of the top 15 best-selling videos of all time. The Return of Jafar made over $300 million on a shoestring budget. It cost just $5 million to make. For context, Aladdin would have cost over $28 million. The sequel's success was so significant that the Los Angeles Times wrote that it removed the low-quality stigma from direct-to-video releases entirely, and all of a sudden every other studio wanted to get involved, including Universal, who owned the rights to The Land Before Time because they distributed the original film. The Return of Jafar was released on May 20th, 1994, and then on June 18th, The Land Before Time 2 was announced. In fact, they announced 3 straight-to-video sequels, which would be released back-to-back. The first being The Land Before Time 2, The Great Valley Adventure, which came out on December 23rd, 1994. The sequel deviated from the first film in many ways, the most notable being that it was now a musical, and none of the behind-the-scenes talent that brought the first one together returned, meaning there was no involvement from Bluth, Spielberg, or Lucas. Instead of being animated by the legendary team at Sullivan Bluth Studios, the film was animated overseas in the Philippines, by Universal Animation Studios. This was done to save money, and because Bluth was working on films like Thumbelina at the time. It was a pretty major downgrade from the first film, but that didn't stop Universal from continuing with their sequels. They released basically one sequel film per year until 2007, and just how successful were the sequels? Well, very successful. There aren't individual breakdowns of the series sales available, but what we do know is that by the year 2000, the series had collectively grossed over $1 billion, and there were only 6 films out at that point, so I'd imagine the current total is a lot higher. For Universal at that point, instead of, should we make another one? It was, why would we ever stop? But why did they start with the yearly sequels in 2007? This is harder to answer, but there are a couple of things that caused this to happen. DVDs peaked in popularity in 2005, and at that point people had started to become less interested in the lower quality movies. In 2006, John Lasseter took over at Walt Disney Animation Studios and immediately cancelled every straight-to-video movie they had in production. Disney was working on sequels to The Aristocats, Chicken Little, and Meet the Robinsons at the time. The straight-to-video sequels were seen as cheapening and tarnishing the brand, so Lasseter wanted to focus more on the theatrical side. Universal likely saw the decline and saw what Disney were doing, and decided that now was time to follow suit. The final Land Before Time sequel was The Land Before Time 14, Journey of the Brave, which came out in 2016, 9 years after the previous film. I believe this was probably to coincide with the huge 2015 release of Universal's Jurassic World. However, given that this was the last film in the series, it must not have done well enough to justify a 15th film in the franchise. And that's the story of the Land Before Time sequels. They were made to fit a new market, and then when they stopped making as much money, they were dropped. They didn't have some master plan behind the sequels, they were just making them until they no longer made financial sense to keep going. The original film still holds up, and if you're a kid who grew up with the sequels, I can see how they would still hold a place in your heart, even if they aren't as good as the first.